In this video, I'm going to show you how to create arrays in MATLAB. It is done through assignment. There are many ways to create a MATLAB array. And you can enter the values manually, or you can create an array if the values follow a specific pattern using the colon operator. Or you can use MATLAB functions to generate the values in the array. First, let's look at how to enter the array values manually. For example, I'm going to create a row vector, which is a one-dimensional array, and it has the value of 1, 2, 3. I'm going to save the value in the variable a. So I will enter a equals bracket 1, 2, 3, and close the bracket. In this expression, I'm going to create a row vector, and the space between the values are separators, and to tell MATLAB that those values are in one row. And you can see this is a row vector. And you can also use comma as a separator to create a row vector. For example, I'm going to create another array which is also a row vector, but this time I use comma as a separator. So if you want to create a column vector, or you want to create an array of multiple rows, in this case you need to use a semicolon to change the row. For example, I'm going to create a column vector, and I'm going to save it in variable b. Still, I will start with a bracket, and then I will say 1, semicolon 2, semicolon 3. And in this case, I will create a column vector. Similarly, I can create another column vector b1 with the value of 4, 5, 6. Okay. And you can also create two-dimensional arrays using the same method. For example, I'm going to create an array and store it in C, and this array has 2 rows, 2 columns. So I will start with the first row. The value, for example, is 1 and 2 because I'm using the space as a separator, so 1 and 2 in one row. And then I use a semicolon, which means the second row, and I enter 3 and 4. In this case, I created a two-dimensional array with 2 rows and 2 columns. Next, I'm going to show you how to use a colon operator to generate an array. The colon operator requires 3 values. The first is the starter value, the second is the increment value, the last is a stop value. For example, I'm going to create a vector of C with a start value of 1, increment value of 2, and the stop value of 10. So the new array will start with the value of 1, and the next value will be incremented by 2 from 1, so it will be 3, and then 5, 7, and 9, and all the way up to the point when the value is the last value that is less than the stop value. It can also be equal to the stop value. So this is what it is. And if I'm going to do a slight differently, so if I use C equals 2, comma 2, comma 10, it means it starts with the value of 2 and increment by 2, and then the stop value will be 10. So in this case, you will see that it will stop when it reaches the value of 10 because 10 is equal to the stop value 10 in the colon operator. You can also choose a negative step. In this case, then the stop value will be the minimum value. So all the value generated must be greater than the start value or equal to the start value. For example, I'm going to create another array, start with the 10 and with the negative step of -2, and it stops at 0. So in this case, it will start with 10, and then every value will be decremented by 2, and all the way to 0, and 0 will be the last value. And if the increment is 1, then you can leave it out. For example, if it says C colon 1 comma 10, it will assume that the step will be 1, or the increment will be 1. In this case, you will see that it starts with 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way up to 10. Okay, so sometimes you may enter it wrong. For example, you will say C equals, like say 2, and you put a -2 as a step, but the end value is 10. In this case, none of the value will satisfy the requirement, which means every value must be greater than 10 because of the negative increment. So in this case, what you get, it will be an empty vector. Next, we're going to discuss how to use MATLAB functions to generate the array. There are a few useful functions. For example, the first function is called 0, and it has multiple use. So let's say if I enter the function zeros with no input value for this function, it will generate a single value of 0. It's like a 1-by-1 array, like this. And I can certainly add one input value to this function. For example, let's say 3. In this case, it means it will generate a 3-by-3 array with all the values of zeros. There you go. And lastly, I can actually specify the rows and columns of this array. So in this case, I will enter the rows, let's say it's 1, and columns, we have 3. So this will be a row vector of 3 zeros. And similarly, we can work with another function called ones, which is to generate the value of 1. So you will see the same output. If I don't provide any inputs, then it will be a single value 1. And if I provide one input, then it will be, in this case, a 3-by-3 two-dimensional array with all the values of 1s. And certainly I will do C equals 1s. If I specify the rows and columns, in this case, it will be a row vector of 3 1s. Another useful function is called linear space. And in this case, it will generate an array that covers the range evenly. It is called a linearly spaced function. So for this function, you need 3 inputs. The first is a starting point, and the second is an ending point. And then you will provide, let's say, how many points total. So in this case, I will say 10. And you will find that it will generate 10 values with the first value of 0 and the last value of 10, and the rest will be evenly distributed within that range. If you do not provide the third input, which is the number values, then the linear space function will return 100 data points by default. And over here you will see it is 100 double precision values, and it will start from 0 and ends at 1. It ends at 10. So in addition to use the manual input, the colon operator, as well as the MATLAB functions to create the arrays, you can actually use the existing arrays to create a new array. For example, over here you will see that we have two arrays that are row vectors. So actually I can concatenate the two row vectors into a bigger row vector. So this is how it works. If I do C equals, I'm still using the bracket. In this case, we're not going to enter the value directly, but instead we will use the variables already created. So one is A, the other is A1, and in this case you will see that A is row vector, and I can easily concatenate another row vector and create a bigger row vector. So this is what it turned out. It will be a 6-element row vector. Also, I can use two row vectors. If they are the same size, I can make them to be a two-dimensional array. All we need to do is to use a semicolon. And in this case, you have to be very careful that the A and A1, they are both the row vectors and they have the same size. In that case, you can put them together and generate a two-dimensional array. However, you cannot put like a row vector and a column vector together and try to form a new array, and that will generate error. For example, in this case, I have a row vector of A and a column vector of B. So you can think about it that one is a row, the other is a column, and they will not match. And if I hit enter, it will tell you that there will be an error in the expression, so it cannot be done. Similarly, we can actually concatenate two column vectors. In this case, what we're going to do is use a C equals, and in this case, we know B is a column vector, and also B1 is another column vector. If we want to line up and create a larger column vector, so what we need to do is to use a semicolon and B1, so it will line up in one column. And similarly, you can actually put the two column vectors side by side because they're the same size, and it will create a two-dimensional array, which will be the 3x2 array. And in this case, I use a space as a separator, so these two will be placed side by side. And this is the two-dimensional array. Next, we're going to show you how to create a Boolean vector. For Boolean vectors, it has only two values. One is called true, the other is called false. And actually, both true and false are MATLAB functions. They have the same behavior as the functions at ones and zeros. So let's see, we're going to create a vector of D, which is a Boolean vector. So in this case, we can enter true, true, false, false, and true. So this vector will have 5 values. And if I hit enter, then just let you know that MATLAB will generate a so-called logical array but instead of represent the values with true, false, but in this case, it just use 1 to represent true and 0 to represent false. And this only appears when you try to output the Boolean array or Boolean vector in the command window. So this is how you create a Boolean vector. Next, we're going to talk about the character vector. And a character is just like an alphanumerical letter, and it is used for a message. And in this case, for example, I'm going to create a character vector, which is S equals, it will be the same thing. You will say G, O, O, and D. So the characters are in the single quote. And each character in a single quote, and we have 4 characters. If I hit enter, it forms a character vector, and it's represent a word good. And it seems that it's kind of cumbersome to enter the characters one by one, and actually there will be an easy way to enter it. You just need to use the single quote and put all the characters together. For example, I'm going to say morning. And you will see the second character array is morning. Now we actually can do the concatenation of the 2 characters. So what I can do is, for example, I'm going to say S2 equals, let's see, S, and then separated by a space, which means they will be in the one row, and the second word will be morning, which is stored in S1. However, if you do so, the outcome will be the good morning. The 2 words will be connected together because there's no space in between. So if I show you the outcome, it will be basically as 2 words, but there's no space in between. So in order to add a space, you need to go back and then add a space in between. So in this case, you will create a new character vector, which is a sentence, good morning.